This is the teeny tiny economy of Greenland and why the heck the US wants a part of it. I'm so tired of this topic and it's annoying. Maybe because I don't know enough, but I was born and raised in Denmark, which owns Greenland. So let's go.
Greenland is a really strange and interesting place.
Oh no,
it's a huge
get this
land
away, man.
mass that is home to an
What the
absolutely
heck?
tiny population
Help
with an
me
equally
out. Please don't leave. I'll make it work.
Greenland is
There
a
you
really
go.
strange and interesting place. It's a huge landmass that is home to an absolutely tiny population with an equally
True.
small economy that is largely just dependent on fishing and support from its big brother Denmark.
There you go.
If this country didn't happen to be on a massive remote island, economically speaking, it wouldn't be much different from a small village.
Yeah.
It has fewer people and produces less economic activity than a lot of zip codes in the USA. What's more is that unlike Iceland, another northern Atlantic
It's an unfair
country
comparison.
that's often
It's
mistaken
cold.
for, Greenland is wealthy, but not
joking.
exceptionally so, producing half the GDP per capita of Iceland despite the apparent similarities. Without a constant supply of funding from other, more established countries, Greenland wouldn't just struggle to maintain its economy, it would struggle to maintain its existence. People have inhabited this inhospitable land for thousands of years, but over the last 3 decades, those same people have realised that there are other options, and are moving to places with more opportunities and more than 12 hours of sunlight a year. Because of this, Greenland's future is uncertain at best. But that's not why much larger economies are interested in it. They are more interested in its potential. Of course, for better or worse, Greenland has recently been making headlines as it's found itself in the freedom crosshairs of the USA. The reason this is happening, and the reason it still gets so much foreign support, is because of its potential to be a major resource producer, its potential to be a major strategic outpost, its potential to be a trade hub along some of the fastest developing shipping lanes in the world, or maybe just its potential to secure a political legacy.
I think the issue here as well is with the US feeling such a threat on its superpower stance, it's sometimes making moves where the rest of the world is looking at it as a bully, as you're an idiot, as how can you even consider an entire geographical location as something you can just take like that? Does it have no importance to you other than the strength of your country? That's crazy. I think there's just a little bit of a lack of empathy in some sense, right? Or at least an understanding, hey, these are actually a bunch of people and you can't just go in and take stuff. But at the same time, the other argument is that they're saying people in Greenland might actually want this. But remember, the people in Greenland are owned by a country which might not want it. I don't know. Do the Danish agree?
Its
Let's
unique
see.
spot in the geopolitical landscape can teach us a lot about the strange dynamics of our new global economy.
I think it's just the way it's done is distasteful. But
And just as interesting as all of that is how this little
am
economy
I?
actually functions
guess.
domestically. Even outside of current issues, being this isolated presents some formidable challenges.
Yeah.
So, how does Greenland's economy function? Why are global superpowers fighting over it? And finally, what does all of this mean for the future of this strange region? Once we have done all of that, we can put Greenland, one of the world's weirdest economies, on the Economics Explained.
well, I mean, I'd say Denmark is not a global superpower, but maybe there's others fighting for it as well that I didn't know about.
You know, global conflicts aren't just fought on battlefields. They're won through strategy, diplomacy, and economic power. That's why, if you enjoy thinking about how nations manage resources, alliances, and conflicts on a global scale, Conflicts of Nations is a game you'll want to check out. In Conflicts of Nations, you take control
Nice
of a real-world
sponsor.
country in a modern geopolitical scenario. You'll navigate international relations, manage resources, and make strategic decisions in real time against up to 128 other players. You'll be making the same decisions that real military leaders do, researching new tech, deploying tanks, stealth bombers, and even nuclear submarines. Games unfold over weeks, making every choice, whether you invest in research, form alliances, or expand infrastructure, truly impactful. Also, you can play on PC or mobile with the same account, meaning you can control the battle whether you're at home
Seems
or on the go.
extensive.
And here's something to give you a head start. By clicking the link in the description, you'll get an exclusive gift of up to 13,000 gold and a free month of premium
Go
subscription.
for it.
But
Do
this
it.
exclusive offer is only available
Do
for
it.
the next 30 days, so don't miss out. If you're someone who loves
Do it.
thinking strategically about how nations
Download
operate on
it.
the global stage, Conflicts of Nations is a great way to test your skills. Click the link in the description, claim your free rewards, and start playing today.
Download in the App Store. Who wrote that? You see that? Download in the.
Okay, so to properly understand the economy of Greenland, the first step is understanding what Greenland even is. It is its own country, although it's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a sovereign state which comprises Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and Denmark itself.
Yeah.
This is similar in many ways to Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. Greenland has its own head of government, the Prime Minister or Premier of Greenland, but the Prime Minister of Denmark, currently Mette Frederiksen, is actually the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Denmark, so technically makes policy for all of these countries. People in Greenland get to vote for the Greenlandic Parliament, and they also get to vote for 2 representatives in the Danish Parliament, but Danish citizens from Denmark do not get to vote for Greenland's Parliament. Its people are given the option to choose a Danish passport or a Greenlandic passport, but for issues like citizenship and freedom of movement within the European Union, Greenland and its people are just considered Danish citizens. That's the technicalities. But before this turns into a CGP grey video about the oddities that come up when trying to combine a 4,500-year-old settlement with a centuries-old kingdom, decades-old representative government, and a 30-year-old supranational economic union, it's important to put aside the technicalities and focus on the practicalities. Greenland has a population of just 57,000 people and a total economic output of just $3.3 billion. Its largest city is effectively just a small village, and it's so remote and inhospitable that it's effectively impossible to build any modern advanced industry there that wouldn't be better suited back in mainland Europe or in the comparatively far more developed Iceland. Despite these challenges,
As far as I know, Iceland kicked out its bankers and is doing really well. Is that true? I need to watch another video on that, I think.
Greenland is still a high-income country, although to be fair, it kind of cheats a little bit. Its biggest industry is government administration, primarily paid for with transfers coming from Denmark. Almost half of the tiny workforce is employed by some level of government, which even in a large, sprawling country would...
I think you'd have to convince Greenland as well, if you're the US wanting to take over Greenland, or to at least have strategic outposts there. Are you going to pay for their healthcare? It's a big deal.
Be excessive, but in a small, relatively simple place like Greenland, it's hard to argue that this isn't effectively just rebranded welfare. Denmark also supports Greenland by subsidising its private store chains to operate in the ultra-remote location, and Greenland Air operates routes that are also subsidised by the government to connect even more remote locations across the country that decided that a city with 25,000 people was just too much hustle and bustle.
I think as well, Denmark does pay for a lot of subsidies for Greenland, and the US is notorious for not doing any of that stuff. At least when it comes to healthcare and businesses, so is the US willing to do that? And if that happens, will the American people in, I guess, mainland America be happy about not getting it for themselves? Those same benefits. It's a weird dilemma.
The Kingdom of Denmark also maintains control over foreign policy and defence, footing the bill for both of these functions. Now, again, this is similar to the UK, where England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales handle these issues collectively as well, although there is again the practical consideration that they all inhabit the same region, whereas Greenland doesn't even share the same continent. Now, the support given from Denmark proper to keep Greenland functioning is not so much charity as it is just regular governance. There are plenty of regions within most economies that absorb more government revenue than they produce in taxes. The only reason it seems unusual in the case of Greenland is that it's so remote and separate.
Fair.
The long-term vision is that this support will slowly be wound back as Greenland explores alternatives to maintain quality of life for its people as it becomes more independent of Denmark, or perhaps if some people get their way, totally independent. But that has been a slow process because, again, practically, it's very hard for such a small, remote, barren country to build domestic industries that would afford them these high incomes.
I guess I don't know the benefit of Denmark even keeping Greenland in some sense. If you know, put it in the comments.
Unless... Alright,
Please.
So of course, the reason we're exploring Greenland is because of renewed US interest in claiming the country by apparently whatever means necessary. Now, so far, this kind of looks like the world's most powerful country wants to effectively seize the geopolitical equivalent of a dependent child that still relies on their parents for an allowance. It doesn't really sound like something worth compromising strategic relationships with an integral part of the EU and a fellow member of NATO. But, to be fair, there are a few things that they potentially see in this otherwise unremarkable economy, and the first one is resources. Greenland is a large, unexploited landmass that has a wealth of rare earth metals, precious metals, minerals like rubies, sapphires, and diamonds, and the big bird's favourite, oil and natural gas. Now, there is a...
It's always oil, huh? The US has a thing with oil. Specifically. Find oil in your home, and the US is going to find a reason to invade it. That's the story. I think the thing is, I wouldn't want the US to have Greenland and Canada as a 51st state simply because I believe in small government, I believe in sovereign borders, and I believe in the separation of too much control.
The difference between these
But I know a lot of people. It's crazy, actually. A lot of people who are part of MAGA have voted for Trump to make America first. And these things are arguably not exactly America first. Or is it America first and not Americans first? There's a difference.
resources been there and them actually being useful. Despite having fairly well surveyed a series of sites with a wealth of natural resources, mining in Greenland just isn't really a thing. The only active mine currently in the entire country extracts a northsite, which is used for rock wool insulation, and is, at best, a small contribution to an already very small economy.
There you go.
The problem with all of this is that, yeah, the resources are there, but between the harsh climate, huge distances and small workforce, they are so hard to get to that extracting them profitably is a real challenge.
Sure.
Now, some of these issues could be overcome with infrastructure investment and fly-in mining workers. What's more is that a retreating of the ice sheet that covers most of the island is making it easier to get at a lot of these materials and to build out the transport infrastructure needed to get to them, which is good. Anyway, these endeavours have all got to be balanced out with an existing population that isn't going to be thrilled with their country becoming a remote mining outpost.
Yeah, 100%.
But they are still trying to encourage foreign investment to realise these potential revenues. Another key interest is the country's strategic location right at the top of the world. As ice sheets have melted, new shipping lanes across the Arctic have become viable, often cutting thousands of miles out of journeys between major trading partners. Currently, Russia has been pushing to take advantage of this as the country, despite its vast landmass, has struggled with access to the world's oceans for trade or military projection. The USA clearly wants to both take advantage of these new trade routes and also have influence over them to protect their little corner of the world. Now, US military involvement in Greenland is not new. The Thule Air Force Base has existed there since the early 1950s, serving as an early detection station for missiles fired from the then Soviet Union, and also as a strategically positioned airfield. Today, it's actually run by the US Space Force, but effectively serves a similar function, at least as far as we know.
Still.
The US doesn't directly pay rent or anything like that to keep the base there. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and the Kingdom of Denmark is part of NATO, so this was maintained under that agreement. However, in such a small economy, this base is not an insignificant factor. There are roughly 600 personnel there, more than 1% of the population, and it does provide contracting jobs to domestic businesses. The exact numbers are naturally not publicly available, but these kinds of bases are not cheap to operate, so it does work as an international service export. Now, even before the most recent interest in bringing the country under the wing of the Bald Eagle, this base has not been without its controversies. But even still, the US is likely going to be allowed to maintain this outpost for as long as they want, effectively giving them the strategic advantage of Greenland without any of the liability of Greenland. Now, nobody can predict the future, least of all economists, but it's highly unlikely that Greenland will become part of the USA anytime soon, and even less likely that it would be an economically productive move. Territory purchases do happen.
The thing is, yeah, you'd have to understand, like, there's many layers of lasagna here, or lasagna layers. But you could probably come up with many theories as to why this is happening and whether it will happen, and they can all have merit. Do you think it's a good or a bad thing? We don't know.
Purchased Alaska from Russia, but that was a long time ago, and the practice has largely fallen out of favour around the world. The last territory purchase to happen was in 2017 for a completely uninhabited desert island between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and before that it was for a few border towns between West Germany and the Netherlands in 1963. So long ago that the purchasing country doesn't even exist anymore. Really, the only reasonable path is for Greenland and its people to become part of the US by popular demand. It's not impossible. Polls suggest that there is support for the idea, but they were unreliable at best. The country would need to become fully independent of Denmark, which, as we've explored, is not going to be easy for them to do, and then decide that after that, they want to put themselves back under the control of another offshore government. Okay, now it's time to put Greenland on the...
I think trying to find out whether the people of Greenland actually want this is an incredibly critical thing, right? I mean, you'd want to know if the people want to actually be part of the US, because you'd have to also understand, once they wake up and smell the coffee, do they realize what the US actually wants to do there? Does anyone actually understand that? It's always PR until the thing actually happens. And the US is notorious for this, where they go in somewhere with a certain reasoning and it ends up that it was different than what they said. Iraq and WMDs, of course, this is not a war. They're not going to wage war on Greenland. Will it be beneficial for Greenland is the question, and for the people there. That's the question. And people of Greenland cannot vote until they understand this better.
Economics Explained.
I would ask, if there's anyone from Greenland watching this, that would be the most epic response to have. Please, let us know.
Leaderboard.
Maybe
Starting
it's in
as
the
always
comments,
with
I'll check.
size, Greenland is a tiny economy. For all the reasons we've explored in this video, developing any industry of scale is really difficult, and that's assuming they had the manpower to even work those industries if they were developed.
That's the thing, right? So if you're from Greenland, you have to question, hey, we don't have much to offer. So what is it they want from us? What is it they can get? And what can we get in return that's favorable to us?
The country itself is very large geographically, but in terms of economic activity, I wish there was a nice way to say this, but it's effectively a remote village. It's so small the IMF doesn't even produce figures for it, and the World Bank hasn't updated their numbers since 2021.
Crazy.
But back then, it had a total nominal output of $3.3 billion, making it roughly comparable to Aruba, half the size of the Maldives, or about 9,000 times smaller than the USA. It gets a 1 out of 10. Now, to be fair, that tiny GDP is spread out over an even tinier population, which means that GDP per capita is still very healthy at $57,000,
Sure.
placing it between the Netherlands and Austria, two very high-income advanced economies. Now, a lot of that is dependent on support from the Kingdom of Denmark, and it must be recognised that Denmark proper has a GDP per capita $10,000 higher, but even still, it gets an 8 out of 10. Stability and confidence is fine. It's an advanced democratic country with support from another advanced democratic country, and unless it gets invaded, that's unlikely to change anytime soon. Now, it's still tiny, so it doesn't have many baskets to keep its eggs in terms of diversifying its economic base, and without overseas support, it would be in a lot of trouble, so it can only get a 7 out of 10. Growth has been slow but steady, boosted largely by a growing fishing industry and a bit more interest in tourism coming from people who want an adventurous destination. It's 30% larger than it was a decade ago, giving it a...
I had a friend in Denmark who went to Greenland. I don't remember for how long. It was quite a long time, a few months at least, maybe a year even. But he told me he loved it there. He told me he loved how it was obviously a slower pace, and there was a sense of community there that was way stronger than what he had in Denmark. Keep in mind, as far as I know, there's also problems with depression and suicide in places like Greenland. It's such a small place. Also, not enough sunlight, most likely. I don't know. But just a side note, right? Interesting piece of info, I guess.
Finally, industry, and obviously this one is not great. Now, to be fair, it does have a diverse range of industries, so in some ways it's better than the petrostates. But their biggest employer is government administration, and one of their largest private employers is government-subsidised whaling. It can only get a 1 out of 10. Altogether, that gives Greenland an average score of 4.4 out of 10, putting it down here on the Economics Explained leaderboard. Thanks again to Conflict of Nations for sponsoring this video. Click on the link in the description to download the game and get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Now, we've made an entire video on the USA's last big territory purchase, Alaska, which is a potential insight into what a resource-rich Arctic US state could become, and you should be able to click that video on your screen now.
Go for it. Economics Explained, the teeny tiny economy of Greenland. Doesn't really explain why the US might want to have interest in it, I get, but who knows? Hey, let's see if any people from Greenland are here. We really got Greenland placed on the leaderboard before Denmark itself. That made me actually... clickbait country. All I found there was ice. They should have named it Iceland. Yeah, well. The fact that we get free videos by YouTube is truly a gift. Yes, I agree. I remember visiting Greenland as a kid was worth it for the dog sled tour alone. This is maybe unpopular, but consider dropping GDP as a metric and exchange it for GNI. GDP is kind of accounted for in per capita, and the GNI coefficient will tell us more. GDP is a bit of a weird thing sometimes. Greenland is exciting for me because of its untapped hydroelectric and wind energy potential. That's what made Iceland so attractive for data centers and for aluminium recycling. And that's despite how remote it is. There's no logical reason why Greenland can't do the same. Likewise for Nunavut. I don't even know where that is. Is that in Greenland? My bad. Whomever owns Greenland also has claims on its continental shelf, which represents potentially a lot of resources. It's not just what's on the island itself. The US doesn't have a big claim on its Arctic resources, but get Greenland and that claim changes significantly. That's true. Another theory right there. Petition to do Faroe Islands next for that extra trolling of Denmark. There's a big troll campaign right now, that's for sure. Is there no one from Greenland that would comment here? Come on. A quarter of all Greenlanders live in Denmark. Okay, so this is very true. Well, very true, I'm not sure, but I've seen a lot of Greenlanders in Denmark. Met them personally. A quarter of all Greenlanders live in Denmark proper, and thousands of Danes live in Greenland, as does citizens from the Faroe Islands. There are no Greenlander who does not have family in Denmark. It's a realm and have been for hundreds of years. How would the Americans square that circle? Denmark already juggles 3 languages, but America wants to stir a 4th into the equation? Families will be split, and some would have to adhere to foreign legislation and alien customs and will need a visa to visit each other. The USA can't just convict them all to be Americans. That is too hard a punishment, and having done absolutely nothing wrong, a hostile takeover, creating adversaries in all 3 countries, the rest of Scandinavia, and in most of Europe too. The idea really is utterly outlandish. Greenland does not need any regime change. Hey, I get it. It definitely sounds outlandish. The US has done many more outlandish things in the past, I'm sure. Maybe Greenland could develop a strong economy if they were allowed to, and subsequently adopted an economic strategy like Liechtenstein. I don't know what they've done there. Man, there's a lot to learn here, and I think the most important thing right now is whether the US is actually serious. Because right now it just sounds like a troll. That's exactly the point. What do you think? Should the US control Greenland? Should Greenland become independent? Should Denmark remain to have its control over Greenland? What would be best? Crazy we're even talking about it.